Alright, welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I am John, and this week it is a reaction to a Doug DeMuro video called Here's Why Ford Was Right to Kill Cars. Yes, I know what I'm doing here because Doug is deeply respected. I love him. I love his videos. I respect what he's built, and he is one of the grand dons of YouTube automotivedom. And I disagree with him on this. I watched this last night, as a matter of fact, and it's kind of been bothering me, and I wanted to talk through some of the things that he says because as much as I respect him, I disagree with him about this. And it's been something I've been talking about recently on my channel with Ford and Lincoln, so I thought it was appropriate. Let's dig into it and see what he says.
This is Doug DeMuro, and today I want to talk about Ford. In April of 2018, Ford announced that it was canceling all of its cars, all of its non-SUV car models, except the Mustang. People thought they were nuts, they were ridiculous, it was a terrible decision, people complained, it was laughed at on the internet. Well, it's been 5 years and Ford was right. Okay, so let's get into this. Like I said, April 2018, you might remember it, Ford makes this public announcement that they are no longer going to offer car models. So that meant they were canceling the Focus, the Taurus. The surprising one to me was the Fusion, which was selling at big units, and they were only going to continue making the Mustang in terms of cars. Everything else, they would shift their focus to SUVs, vans, and trucks. And I remember the internet went wild at this. Everybody saw that the market was heading toward SUVs, but to just cut them unceremoniously kind of at once was a big surprise to a lot of people, especially when some of these cars were still doing well. I personally was surprised about the Fusion. Fusion was still selling like a couple 100,000 units a year, and they were like, we're done, we're cutting it. It's like, don't you want those hundreds of thousands of annual sales? But they said no. They cut.
And I'll agree with that. I like the Fusion. I've said before on this channel that we've got one in the family. As a matter of fact, it's a great car. I've looked at it multiple times. It's not perfect, but what really frustrates me is that they still have a similar size product in the Mondeo that they sell over in China. I've talked a lot about this. They still make the equivalent of this car. They just don't bring it here, in spite of the fact that it was selling a couple 100,000 a year, and even after they made the announcement that they were going to be cutting cars, it still sold like 200,000, 150, and 110,000. I mean, it's hard to believe they couldn't find a way to import and sell another 100,000 cars and not just give everything to the Toyota Camry.
So, it's been 5 years since this decision was made, and Ford made the right decision. And I wanted to do a little retrospective because so often when things like this happen, people are shocked at the moment and then they move on and they kind of forget about it. And I think a lot of people will respond to this video saying, I wasn't shocked, I knew that cars were the right decision. That was not the prevailing sentiment at the time. But regardless, it is interesting to do this look back and see, okay, they made this decision, how has it benefited them, how has it affected them? So, here's what happened. Okay, first off, cars have continued to decline. General Motors made the exact same decision that Ford did to get rid of its car models about a year after Ford did it. They decided to cut, the Impala and the Malibu and all of those vehicles. So it's not like Ford was completely out on a limb. General Motors followed in their footsteps and did it as well. And the car market in general has continued to decline. People don't want cars like they want trucks and SUVs. It's just become like a permanent shift in the interest base in consumers.
And that's absolutely correct too. I have to agree with that to a point. Actually, most recent car data is showing that the car market has not coming back, but it has come back up. There was a point last year in 2022 where cars were like 19% of the market. Now it's back up over 21, so it's probably settled into about that range. And certainly like Toyota, they've got the new Crown, which is replacing the Avalon. So the Avalon never really sold that great, and what they've done is they've come out with something to fill that big car space, but it looks more sport utility-ish. So yes, it's definitely softened, but the Camry still continues to be a big seller. The Accord continues to sell well. I think the Ultima still selling pretty well. Ford just gave up in their quest for selling cars, and those people who wanted cars, they went somewhere else, and I don't think they all went to Ford SUVs.
Not only has the market continued to shift, and not only have other brands followed in Ford's footsteps, but, and I think this is the key thrust of this video, by doing what Ford did, it allowed them to focus all of their energy on trucks and SUVs and not be spread so thin in a wide market, some of which wasn't really getting that much interest, aka cars. So in other words, instead of like making decent products around a 20-car product line, you focus on 10 hot products and you just kill it, you knock it out of the park. And if you pay attention to Ford over the last 5 years, that is exactly what they've done.
Okay, so yes and no. I think that it makes sense for Ford. It made a strong business sense of where they're going to allocate their resources. I get that. And you can argue, and he's going to in a minute here, I think, that Ford came up with products that if they were spending the money on new cars, they couldn't develop these products with it, right? But Nissan, Toyota, to a lesser extent, Honda, Kia, and Hyundai, they all continued to develop cars and expand their SUV offerings at the same time. Something doesn't jive here for me. I see what Ford's doing. It doesn't quite jive.
So, the cars are gone, but the Bronco is here. After years of will they, won't they with the Bronco, Ford finally shows up and comes out with the Bronco, and it is unanimously agreed to be cooler and better and more exciting than the Jeep Wrangler. I am making this video in early 23. The Bronco's been out 2 years plus. And Ford is still selling them over sticker. I got a buddy looking for one right now. Dealers here are still asking $25 over sticker. They're not getting it, but they're asking it. And the point is, that ain't happening on Fusions and Fiestas. It just was never occurring.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't benefit the manufacturer at all. In fact, that hurts the manufacturer. I get what he's saying. That is a really, really cool product for people who like that product. And yes, it looks awesome, and it's an awesome vehicle. I'd rather have the Jeep. That's my preference. However, if your dealership is trying to get $25,000 more, that's not going back to the manufacturer. That's not helping Ford, other than being indicative of the demand for it. That's going to the dealership, and it's hurting Ford's reputation because the customer base is just like, why are you gouging me? That's not an argument for not selling cars. The Bronco making a higher profit margin per unit than the Fusion, yes. It's selling for over sticker? Absolutely not.
Bronco shows up. It's a great Wrangler fighter. That puts Chrysler in the defensive. Then Bronco Raptor shows up, and it makes things even more exciting, and it puts Chrysler even more on the defensive. They have to come out with the Wrangler 392. They have to kind of go back to the drawing board to make the Wrangler more appealing. You know, Chrysler for years had sort of redesigned the Wrangler and then let it sit for like 10 years because there was no competition, and what else are you gonna buy? They don't have that luxury anymore because Ford has shown up with the Bronco and they have killed it.
No. Time out. I disagree. Well, I half agree with that. He's absolutely right. Competition is good, and it has forced Chrysler, Stellantis, Jeep to up their game and invest some resources in the Jeep brand, in the Wrangler. I agree with that. But saying that they knocked it out of the park, that's only half true. And this one has really, really gotten under my skin. The Bronco is cool. I get why people like it. I get why people would buy that over the Wrangler. But if you are cutting your cars to free up resources to pour it into a product that would not have happened if you still were trying to do cars, right? We're taking these resources and we're putting them here to create this awesome car. You produce it where the engines don't catch on fire. You produce it where they don't have recalls. Ford is leading the industry in recalls for 2 years running, so they might be focusing their resources. They might be coming out with the good products in specific niches, but you can't say that they're class leading except in the road test. Maybe they test well, maybe they look good, but they're not hitting it in the quality part. And let's go back and let's cast that bright shining light on the fact that Toyota is supporting a full lineup of cars and SUVs and trucks, and they're not having the recall problems Ford are. Ford is. This is a institutional problem at Ford. They put the resources in it to come up with some of these cool products, but I wouldn't say they're actually knocking it out of the park because reliability recalls, warranty claims. They're indicating they're not.
50 Raptor, which is another vehicle that Ford has leaned into more since getting rid of their car models. The latest Ford F-150 Raptor is great, and it's selling tremendously well. Again, all these sell at sticker. There's an enormous amount of demand. Now there's this Raptor R that's even crazier, that's even more exciting. We're going to get people paying $125,000 for a light-duty pickup truck, because this thing is here and it's cool and Ford has focused on it. But it's not just the cool enthusiast stuff. The Bronco Sport. Car enthusiasts love to complain, a Bronco Sport, it's like a fake Bronco. All right, I get it. It is kind of like a fake Bronco. But it's really popular in the compact crossover world, because up until this point, virtually every compact crossover was kind of a weenie car with like rounded styling and you didn't really want it. And then the Bronco Sport shows up and it like has the Bronco name and the Bronco boxy styling, and everybody's like, cool, here's a compact crossover I can drive and not look like kind of a loser, and also kind of like a general everyday boring crossover driver. And for that reason, I love the Bronco Sport. I get that it's not like the enthusiast car, but if you think about the car for its segment, I think this thing does great. It was a brilliant idea, and it's another car that Ford has sold in massive, massive units.
I completely agree. I don't necessarily agree that you had to cut cars to get to the Bronco Sport. He absolutely nailed it with the Bronco Sport. And as a matter of fact, not half an hour ago, I was talking to somebody, and we were talking about him having to buy a new car. And I was like, dude, look at the Bronco Sport. It hits everything you need. And he's like, I don't want a small crossover. I'm like, dude, you need to go look at this. Because it's not the Escape, the CR-V, the RAV4, the Rogue, or anything from Mitsubishi. This thing is pretty freaking cool. I think it's a flawed car. However, it's all based on that same chassis, that same frame that they use for the Escape and the Maverick and the Corsair. This would have been a very easy car for them to develop anyway. And he's absolutely right. It looks awesome. I absolutely think they look great. And if you don't want something that looks like you're running to the grocery store, that's the choice. But I still say, with the investment it would take to take a platform to make it look different, you didn't have to cut all your cars to do that one. And going back to the trucks, talking about the Raptor and things like that, sure, you get to focus on these are higher trim lines. That's not really benefiting the customer. Yeah, sure, the people who can afford it, who can afford a $100,000, $120,000 Ford truck, their trim lines, their variations on the platform. We're not talking about the money it takes to develop all new platforms from the ground up and be competitive. We're talking about more and more advanced trim lines. Maybe that frees up management and product strategists to focus on something and develop these higher profit margins for Ford. But I'm still not convinced you had to cut all your cars to get to it.
Then we have the Maverick. Here's a vehicle that is like segment busting, that no one else has really been able to come out with a competitor to, a tiny compact truck that's affordable. We do have the Hyundai Santa Cruz in addition, but it's less usable and less affordable. It's more of a lifestyle thing. Maverick is more utilitarian. And here's Ford showing up with this thing, putting resources behind this little truck. And for years on the internet, people have been saying, if only they brought back a little affordable truck, then I could get that and do my stuff. Well, now they did. And honestly, a lot of people are getting in and doing their stuff. Like, those people turn out not to be lying. They actually are going out and buying these Mavericks. And they're really desirable. The hybrid ones get great mileage. There's now this off-road Tremor version. They're all reasonably practical, good-sized interiors. This is a great product. And frankly,
completely agree. 100%. I would give up 10 Ford Focuses for a Maverick. Completely agree with him on this.
It's the same deal with the Ranger. Now, this is a little bit different because the Ranger was already being sold overseas and they just kind of brought it here and we're sort of awaiting a new one. But again, this is Ford returning to this segment where they had been popular before and going after established vehicles like the Tacoma and the Chevy Colorado. And they finally have like a real competitor in this segment that they're finally putting some resources behind.
Well, and I've got to disagree with him on that. That was a worldwide platform that they already had. They were already selling around the world. They had to Americanize it to bring it here. What they needed was the management decision to go ahead and do it. Did they need some resources? Of course. Can Ford do everything all the time, all at once? Of course. But they took an old platform, Americanized it a little bit, and brought it here. It's been a strong seller. But it's not like they designed something from the ground up just for America and that this would have never happened. They just need to make the decision to do it. I mean, all of these, if you take them, other than the Bronco, right? The Maverick is a re-engineer. I imagine that took quite a bit of the Escape platform. You've got the Bronco Sport, the Escape platform. You've got this, which was a worldwide platform that they've already used, and variations of the F-150, which already they'd invested in. You know what? Let's face it. The Taurus, the big car, was not going to sell well. The Avalon ended up getting, removed because it wasn't selling well. The Fiesta never sold well and wasn't terribly competitive, but you've still got small cars and mid-size cars. You've still got something to compete with the Camry and the Accord and the Altima and Volkswagen, and then you've still got maybe the Focus coming here. Cut two lines at the extremes that aren't selling, but keep the middle and investing in those. Nothing I'm hearing here says that Ford could not have done at least something. And they did do it. Let's see if he touches on it.
Also true of the new Ford Explorer. The Explorer had this big redesign in the early 2010s, and it was starting to get pretty old, and it was going to take significant investment to bring it up to where it needed to be to compete. And Ford did that by switching the chassis to rear-wheel drive, by giving it more of a performance feel, a larger body, a larger interior, and then basing a Lincoln model off it called the Aviator, which is a fantastic luxury SUV product and a great competitor to its luxury SUV rivals. And by the way, speaking of Lincoln and SUVs, the same is true of the Navigator. It's starting to get a little old, but the Navigator is a really, really high quality, fantastic luxury SUV that again was a car that was getting very old, very outdated, and then Ford was able to put some resources behind it and bring it up to a competitive level against the BMW X7, the Mercedes GLS, the Cadillac Escalade, all of these other big SUVs, kind of right at the right time. Buyers were really starting to gravitate towards these, and Ford shows up with the best Lincoln Navigator ever.
Well, and I have to disagree slightly on this, because the Explorer is not a huge success. If you're talking about cutting all your cars so you free up these resources to pour it into getting a product right, the Explorer is not a great example. I mean, yes, they changed the chassis, they went to rear-wheel drive. I like it. I think it looks fantastic. I like the interior, as a matter of fact. I like the Explorer a lot, and we own the previous generation. Until you go sit in a Kia Telluride or a Hyundai Palisade, and then all of a sudden this Ford comes across cheap. When you look at that Escape and then you look at the Explorer, the design on the interior is pretty nice. It's interesting. It's an interesting mix of materials, but once you look at each individual piece, it's cheap, and it is not class leading. As much as I like the Explorer, as much as I would consider buying one, I have to be honest enough to say it's not class leading. So if Ford cut all of their cars to develop this kind of thing, they ended up maybe hitting a double, and that's it. And the same thing with Lincoln. Yeah, they've got pretty good platforms that they've been able to turn into Lincolns. The Lincolns are very well reviewed, but as I've talked about on this channel a couple of times now, Lincoln sales are in free fall because people don't want to buy one of the exactly 4 SUVs they offer, because you know what? They don't have a car. They don't have a Ford car to base a Lincoln on anymore. So this no-car philosophy has backfired on them, I believe, at the Lincoln level.
And I'm not even talking about electric cars yet. The new Ford Mustang Mach-E has been a big hit, and one of the first legitimately credible challengers to Tesla. When people come to me and say, I want an electric car, I don't really necessarily want a Tesla because of Elon, I say to them, you gotta go look at a Mach-E. The Mach-E is like a Model Y. It has a lot of the same stuff. The tech is really great. There's no Elon. There's a lot of benefits to the Mach-E. And this car has great performance. It has reasonable pricing. It has reasonable range, great tech, great auto steering and driver assist. There's a lot of great things about it. And I see them everywhere, so they must be doing reasonably well. The Mach-E has also been a big success. And then, of course, there's...
No, I have to half disagree with him on this. The Mach-E is a success, and if you don't want a Model Y and you don't want that melted bar of soap look, then yes, the Mach-E is one of the places you should go look. It's a really, really cool car, but it's not better than the Model Y, and I don't think it's cheaper than the Model Y. I haven't checked with Tesla's recent price drops. I don't quite remember where they line up right now, but in terms of range and everything else being a cohesive whole, I do think the Tesla product is better. The Mach-E is cool, and it looks a lot better. But the Model Y is better, and I think cheaper. And this also it shows a flaw of if Ford is canceling every car to make another SUV, but then they're doing it as an EV. They built a standalone platform for the Mach-E. Whereas you look at other manufacturers, Honda's finally doing it, and certainly GM with their Ultium platform, they're designing a platform that can be used across multiple products. Ford went and invested these limited resources they have into developing this one car. They're not using it for anything else. Where's the Lincoln version of this? Where's a car version of this EV platform? Where's the Model 3 competitor? They designed a standalone, apparently, EV platform. That's not a good use and decision to use the limited resources they're apparently marshaling for this product line, for the product onrush, right? It's good. It is absolutely good. I don't know where it sells compared to the Model Y. I'm sure it's a distant third or second, something like that. But still strikes me as a management misstep because, well, you've got an EV platform. Let's not do anything else with it.
There's the Lightning. The F-150 Lightning has also been a great example of Ford deploying its truck and SUV resources in an excellent way. This was one of the first electric pickup trucks on the market. It has been a very successful truck so far. There's been an enormous amount of demand, an enormous amount of interest, and it's the first one of these that feels really like a truck. I love the Rivian R1T. I love the Hummer EV, but at the end of the day, the F-150 Lightning is a more usable, everyday truck. It's more affordable. It feels like a regular F-150 in a lot of ways. And that was a great, great decision by Ford, and bringing it to market at this level and this quickly was also excellent use of resources by.
Completely agree. 100%. The F-150, we all know it is the cash cow for Ford. It is the best-selling truck, I don't know, for 30 years, 25, 30 years now. It is a fantastic truck, and it's very popular. And for them to lead into EV trucks, whether you believe in them or not, that's not the argument right now. For Ford to make the decision and the investment to be the first in and come out with something that's just really good, I completely agree on that. That is the best use of resources we've talked about today.
The reason I mention all of these vehicles is because they are all new trucks and SUVs that have come out since the announcement that Ford was going to be switching away from cars toward trucks and SUVs. And this is a big deal because Ford was able to develop these vehicles in part because they weren't spread so thin, focused on cars that increasingly people weren't buying. If you're thrilled that there's a Bronco Raptor, thank the Ford Fiesta for going away. If you're happy that the Lightning came to market before almost every other electric truck, thank the Focus for no longer diverting engineering resources. Ford was able to focus on the vehicles that they knew consumers would want and then make them especially great. And that's exactly what they did. That is literally the exact game plan they said they would do, and they followed it to a T, and they now have segment leaders or near segment leaders in every single segment.
No, and see, this is what really got me about this video and why I'm doing this reaction. These are segment leaders. I said this before. These are segment leaders when you're testing them. But they're not segment leaders in terms of reliability, quality, materials, warranty claims, recalls, right? Ford has massively dropped the ball in the process of coming out with this onrush of new product. It's hard to say that they're developing things class leading, once again, when they're leading the industry in recalls for 2 years running. And the fact is that Ford is continuing to develop cars. They're doing so in China. They have the Mondeo over there. So they're still developing, they're still diverting those resources into developing cars. Now, granted, they seem to have let the Fiesta and the Focus and everything else kind of languish a little bit, but they're still investing in cars. And it still bothers me that they just decided to not participate in cars. When you look at the data since 2018, since this announcement, if they are coming out with these class-leading products that are dominating in their specific segments, and what Ford's doing is slicing in between segments, where the Bronco sits, where the Bronco Sport sits, the F-150 Lightning, they're identifying sections between segments. it's not showing up in sales. When you look at Ford's sales since 2018, they've been falling. So that 200,000 units of Fusion that you gave up because you couldn't just move manufacturing somewhere else or import it from somewhere else, Ford's sales are falling while Lincoln's are falling too. It seems to be a hollow victory for what Ford's doing right now.
Just not cars, which people aren't really buying all that much anyway. It's also worth pointing out that generally speaking, profit margins are larger on SUVs and trucks. There's a lot of shared architecture between these vehicles. People are generally willing to pay more for SUVs and trucks because they think they're getting more, and margins tend to be higher. So Ford presumably is also making a ton of money in addition to selling some excellent products. It was a total win-win, and it really vindicates their decision to go away from cars and put more focus on making the best versions of trucks and SUVs that they could. And they absolutely have. Now, I want to make one last point here. This was a risky pivot. In early 2018, I don't really think you could say cars are done. It's becoming more and more clear, but it was 5 years ago, it was a risky move. And Ford decided to take the leap and just say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give up the midsize segment to the Camry and the Accord. We're going to go do this instead. It was a risky decision, but in the end, it was perfectly timed. They've followed it up with perfect investment in some great technology, and it's gone great, except for the EcoSport. Goodbye, everyone.
And again, I just humbly disagree with him on that. I mean, I do think it was perfectly timed. I completely agree with Ford's decision to stop investment in cars that they were getting less and less and less sales on and focus on new markets, new segments within sectors. That's right. But it has left them, I feel, somewhat hollowed out, and they're not doing it with class-leading, the best products out there. You're left without that mid-size car. You're left without a platform to base Lincolns off of. You're left with a car manufacturer that doesn't have cars and is not competing in 20% of the market versus Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Volkswagen, Kia, Hyundai. Also, your luxury brand does not have cars. And so Lincoln has these 4 SUVs while they're trying to compete with Lexus, Audi, Mercedes, BMW, and Genesis. Ford, it feels like they played everything very close to their vest, that they decided instead of borrowing the money to invest big, they played very, very close and very, very careful. But it's obvious that they've cut down what they're selling in Europe, the cars they're selling in Europe, but they're still investing in cars, specifically in China. It seems to me that if you were already investing the resources in China, if you've got the manufacturing in China, go ahead and invest in making that appropriate for the American market as well. Why let the Toyota Camry take everything if you could import a Fusion? There will be people who say, I don't want an imported one from China. That's true, but still participate in the market. I don't know. I don't agree, because also I don't think that, when I've said it twice now so far, the products they're releasing are truly class leading. Yeah, they've got some cool stuff. I love the Bronco Sport. I love the Bronco. I don't know that they're class leading compared to, certainly like when you look at the Escape, they really juggled the ball on the Escape and getting it out, because they ended up with something that tried to be more car-like and ended up where they actually had to go and do a quick refresh on it to make it, look a little more butch. I don't know. I think Ford has misstepped. I agree with what they tried to do, but I think they abandoned cars too much. They should have kept at least 1 or 2 platforms moving, even if it was being developed somewhere else. They developed all these new products that have sliced into the market. I think that's really cool. They've come out with some cool stuff, but then they bungled it, getting it to market and making sure it was the best quality product. Once again, we're at a place where Toyota and Honda and everybody else are plugging along with better quality than what Ford's coming out with, even though Ford has got these products that test super, super well. And I think it shows up in their sales. Let me know what you think below, guys. Appreciate you being here, but thanks.